Shalom, y'all, and welcome back. In today's video, Bible study with AI, right? So, quick question. We asked AI. We're on ChatGPT. Question is, who are the biblical Israelites today? So, we're not making this stuff up. Now, of course, we got plenty of scholarship and plenty of ways we can prove this. But let's just see what an unbiased computer has to say, right? The question of who the biblical Israelites are today. Well, let me start over. Who are the biblical Israelites today? The question of who the biblical Israelites are today can be answered from different perspectives: religious, historical, cultural, and genetic. Here's a breakdown of the major views. First, religious and historical perspectives. Jewish tradition. The Jewish people, descendants of the ancient Israelites, are widely recognized as the continuation of the biblical Israelites. This includes Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and Mizrahi Jews who trace their spiritual and cultural heritage to the ancient Israelites of the Bible. Christian tradition. Many Christians see the church as a spiritual continuation of Israel, especially in theological frameworks like supersessionism, replacing Israel with the church, or dispersionism. God has distinct plans for Israel and the church. 2. Genetic and anthropological perspective. Modern genetic studies show that many Jewish populations around the world, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, share common Middle Eastern ancestry, supporting a historical connection to the ancient Israelites. However, admixture with local populations over centuries has also occurred, leading to some diversity in appearance and genetic makeup. 3. Cultural and identity-based claims. Beta Israel, Ethiopian Jews, recognized by the state of Israel as descendants of the tribe of Dan, and thus Israelites. Samaritans, a small group in the Levant, claiming descendant from the northern Israelite tribes. Hebrew Israelites / Black Israelites. Some African American and African groups identify as descendants of the biblical Israelites based on religious and historical interpretations. These claims are not generally supported by mainstream historians or genetic evidence, but they form an important part of identity and belief for those communities. 4. Scholarly consensus. Most secular historians and archaeologists view the Israelites as a group that emerged in the ancient Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, from Canaanite roots. The Jewish people are considered the direct cultural and religious descendants of that group. In summary, the most widely accepted view historically, genetically, and religiously is that modern Jewish communities are the primary descendants of the biblical Israelites, though other groups also claim descendant for various reasons. Would you like a deeper dive into one of those perspectives? My response: I didn't ask who are the Jewish people. We know those are derived predominantly from Europeans. But who are the biblical Israelites, not who are the Jewish people that are citizens of the state of Israel? Thanks for clarifying your question. You're asking specifically about the biblical Israelites, the ancient people described in the Bible, and who their true descendants are today. Why is it pointing out true? Apart from the modern Jewish identity often associated with the state of Israel or European Jewry, let's explore that with more precision. 1. Who were the biblical Israelites? The biblical Israelites were a Semitic people said to be descendant from the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose names was changed to Israel. According to the Bible, they were organized into 12 tribes and lived in ancient Canaan, which includes modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and parts of Lebanon and Syria. 2. What happened to them? Historically, these tribes were scattered due to Assyrian conquest. 8th century BCE, northern 10 tribes, the lost tribes, were exiled and assimilated into surrounding cultures. Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE, southern kingdom Judah exiled, some returned, forming the basis for Second Temple Judaism. Roman conquest and diaspora, 1st through 2nd century CE, many Jews scattered across the Roman Empire. 3. Who might be their descendants today, beyond European Jews? Here are some groups that claim or are theorized to be connected to the Biblical Israelites. Mizrahi Sephardic Jews, Middle Eastern and Northern African. These communities often have more Middle Eastern genetic markers than Ashkenazi European Jews. They have preserved ancient customs and languages like Judeo-Arabic, Aramaic. Many scholars consider them culturally and genetically closest to the ancient Israelites. The Samaritans, a small population in Israel and the West Bank who claim descended from the tribe of Ephraim and Levi. They maintain a version of the Torah and worship on Mount Gerizim. Beta Israel, Ethiopian Jews, claim descendant from the tribe of Dan. Their oral traditions and some genetic studies show possible links, but is debated. Recognized as Jewish by Israeli authorities. Lemba people, Southern Africa, claim Israelite ancestry. Genetic studies have shown the presence of the Cohen model haplotype, a marker found among Jewish priests and some Lemba men, suggesting ancient Semitic ancestry. Igbo people, Nigeria. Some claim descendant from Israelite tribes. No definitive archaeological or genetic proof yet, but cultural practices, circumcision, dietary laws, etc. are cited in support. Hebrew Israelite movement, especially in Americas. Many African American and Caribbean people identify as descendants of the Biblical Israelites. This belief emerged during and after slavery, in part as a spiritual reclaiming of heritage. These claims are not supported by mainstream history or genetics, but they have deep cultural and religious significance with these communities. 4. Genetics versus identity. Genetic studies show Jewish groups, including Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and Sephardi, share a common Middle Eastern ancestry, but admixture from regions where they lived. No group today can claim pure descendant from Biblical Israelites, as millennia of intermarriage and migration blur exact lineage. So, who are the Biblical Israelites today? There is no single group that can exclusively claim Biblical Israelite descendant. However, Mizrahi Jews are the most direct cultural and geographical link. Other groups like Samaritans, Beta Israel, Lemba, and some Western African communities may preserve elements of ancient Israelite identity or ancestry. Hebrew Israelite movements reinterpret Israelite identity, spiritually and historically, rooted in social and political context. Would you like a side-by-side chart comparing these groups and the evidence for their Israelite claims? My response: if I were to go by the curses in the book of Deuteronomy specifically, written in chapter 28, who today would those curses fit, as that would be who the Israelites would be biblically? Great. Now you're referencing Deuteronomy 28, which is central to the belief from many who argue that the true biblical Israelites can be identified not by modern history or genetics, but by the curses and prophetic conditions listed in that chapter. Let's break this down carefully. Deuteronomy 28, the curses as a sign. This chapter describes blessings for obedience, verses 1 through 14, and curses for disobedience, verses 15 through 68. The curses were to be upon you for a sign and for a wonder, and upon your seed forever, verse 46. Many take this to mean the Israelites could be identified in history by these specific sufferings. Key curses from Deuteronomy 28 often cited. Here are some notable verses and how they interpreted by those who use this lens. Verse 48, you will serve your enemies in hunger, thirst, nakedness, and in want of all things. Applied to people historically enslaved and economically oppressed. Verse 64, the Lord will scatter you among all people, from the one end of the earth even to the other. Applied to diaspora, especially forced ones. Verse 68, you will be sent back to Egypt in ships, and there you shall be sold unto your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. Egypt is interpreted as a symbolic of bondage/slavery. See Exodus 20 and 2. The reference to ships is taken literally, but some mean the transatlantic slave trade. No one will buy you is often interpreted to mean rejection and abandonment. Nobody comes to redeem or rescue. So who do these curses fit? Many African and African diaspora communities. Example: African Americans, West Indians, Afro-Latinos experienced chattel slavery via ships, were scattered globally through the slave trade, transatlantic and Arab, living in conditions of poverty, oppression, loss of identity, systemic marginalism, lost ancestral names, language, culture, and heritage, matching the biblical description of forgetting who they were, Deuteronomy 28:37, 41, and 45. This interpretation is core to the belief system that many Hebrew Israelite groups who say the Biblical Israelites are not the people commonly called Jews today, but descendants of enslaved Africans scattered throughout the world. Counterpoints and consideration. Most mainstream scholars, religious and secular, do not interpret Deuteronomy 28 as a prophecy, but the transatlantic slave trade about the transatlantic slave trade. Critics argue this approach reads latter history into the text, which originally refers to events like Assyrian and Babylonian exiles. The passage uses poetic and symbolic language, and phrases like "sold, but no one will buy you" are debated. However, supporters of this view respond that biblical prophecy is cynical, not one time. The scale, brutality, and prophetic detail of the slave trade fit Deuteronomy 28 better than anyone known events in Jewish history. Summary: if you're going strictly by Deuteronomy 28 as a prophetic identifier, then the descendants of enslaved Africans, particularly those affected by the transatlantic slave trade, would most closely match the biblical curses. This is why many in the Hebrew Israelite movement claim that black and brown people in the Americas and across Africa, the African diaspora, are the true Israelites of the Bible. Would you like a breakdown of other prophetic passages that reinforce or challenge this interpretation? I said, based on your knowledge of history in contrast to Deuteronomy 28, who would you say fits such prophetic sufferings? Would it be the people claiming to be Jewish or those who are called African Americans? Based on historical comparisons between the prophetic curses Deuteronomy 28 and the real world experiences of different groups, the curses in that chapter, if interpreted literally and prophetically, align much more closely with the historical experiences of African Americans than with those of the Jewish people who primarily identify as Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Mizrahi today. Let's break this down critically. Deuteronomy 28. Key prophetic themes and comparisons. Cause and prophecy over here. Jewish people, African American descendants of transatlantic slavery. Cause and prophecy, scattered among all nations. Yes, due to Roman exile, pogroms, and diaspora. Yes, via transatlantic slave trade across Africa, Americas, Europe, and Africa. Slavery in ships. No historical record of Jews going into slavery in ships in this manner. Yes, literally taken into ships to slavery in the Americas. Sold as male and female slaves. Jews were enslaved in history, Babylonian, Rome, but not in mass transoceanic slavery. Yes, this defines the transatlantic slave trade experience. Loss of name, language, heritage, verses 37 and 41. Jews preserve identity even in exile. African slaves were stripped of names, language, culture, and identity. Oppression and economic hardship, verse 48. Jews have faced persecution, but many communities also gained wealth and power, especially in modern times. African Americans face systemic poverty, redlining, mass incarceration, etc. Children taken and not returned, verse 32. Some during historical events, example Holocaust, but not generationally. Yes, children sold on plantations, families permanently separated. Evaluation from a purely biblical, literalist, historical lens, if you're asking who fits Deuteronomy 28 most literally and extensively in the world history, then the answer leans towards African Americans and the African diaspora affected by slavery. Pause to read. I didn't make this up, but I have Only 15 minutes and 29 seconds left. Well, totally to make this point. But you can see it says, but caution, this interpretation is powerful but not universally accepted. It depends on assuming that Deuteronomy 28 is a prophetic description of future historical events, not just a warning to ancient Israelites. It also implies that modern-day Jewish identity may not trace back to the original biblical Israelites, a claim which is theologically and politically sensitive. Shalom.